So with SM, you're talking about reducing anxiety, building social communication skills as we're talking about it through the activities, but it comes more naturally because it's innate in them. Whereas with autism, it's way more building those skills step by step by step, and also with the social understanding and helping them with flexibility, because many are very rigid. Any changes, something as simple as a hi bye. I remember working with this boy. He was a teenager and mom was just super frustrated. His goal was to say, to goodbye to people. He just didn't do it. He had no motivation to do it. Whereas when they said bye, he could speak. That's what's interesting. It wasn't about he just was disinterested. So they had nothing to say. And so it would frustrate the parent because the child wasn't doing it. But the child I just watched him look at his mom I don't understand why I need to do that. Well, it's manners to say goodbye. I understand when anxiety is stopping them, we may put hand up or high five, but this child could speak. He could turn to that one kid and go, give me the red crown, or give me the book, or I want to go here. So that's what's interesting too. Many individuals that I see on the spectrum can just almost pop into speech sometimes. They just pop into speech. They can all of a sudden become initiative and elaborative over something of interest for them.
Yeah. So I was going to say, when we think about our social communication bridge, right, there's this back and forth, right? There's the responding piece and then there's the initiation piece. And I feel like in many of the episodes, we talk a lot about how 90% of the time or 95%, it's responding's always easier than initiation. But the one population I find sometimes it's different is on the
Yeah.
autism spectrum.
Yeah.
Because you're saying, if we need something or it's an area of interest, we will go out of our way to be oh, when can I go to the bathroom? Or I want a break now. Right. And so some people might be oh, wow, they're working on their initiation skills. But the minute you ask them a question, they shut down.
Yeah, no,
Right.
this is
And
a
that's,
great point. You're absolutely right. I see this a lot, whereas we have to work more on initiation with someone not on the spectrum, whereas kids on the spectrum can be more initiative, but not as responsive.
exactly. Yeah. So that's definitely a huge differential. We see this a lot at Communicamp where, in those structured activities, which again, for someone with SM is so beneficial, right? To have structure, routine, consistency, predictability, which I would argue is still good for both populations, but definitely for individuals on the spectrum, sometimes that structure, if it's not an area of interest or not something that they're ready for, that's where they're still kind of in their own world. They're shut down. They're kind of just still in that present moment, just focusing on what they want to do. Versus the other child with SM might be physically stuck, right? But really wants to engage and learn those skill sets. So I think it's kind of again, you will see a variation, but I also think, emphasizing that it is a spectrum, right? So the higher functioning someone is, and the more tuned they are to their feelings, their cognitions, why this might be harder, wanting to kind of learn. I mean, that again, it really depends on the individual, but I would say that overall there's definitely sometimes these vast differences and we want to highlight that so that way when we go in and we do an evaluation, we can really make a distinction of, is this SM, is this autism, or is it both? And like you said, most of the time we're getting people that are just SM or kind of that comorbidity of both, because sometimes we get the autism piece, but most of the time it's because they are shut down in certain settings.
They're mute. They're not speaking, so they're attracted to us for that reason. So it's like you said, it's kind of like the both, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to talk about how kids on the spectrum can mask,
Yeah.
right? Especially girls. Can you just touch on that? And then I want to get into the evaluation process before we're done.
Yeah, I mean that's that's a really loaded question for the end, but
So you
just
mean it's too loaded for 30 seconds?
well, no, I'll give a little bit of a overview. But masking is basically when individuals on the spectrum have the ability to, develop different skills to almost kind of camouflage within their community. So they learn these different skills to be able to function, maybe have a back and forth, but it doesn't come as natural for them. And again, many times research has found that women tend to do that more than men. I would say that we see masking more as individuals get older. I do have a lot of individuals that I work with. I just had a 10-year-old who did an evaluation for, and actually we ruled out autism. And one of the reasons was mom was saying, she mass a lot. So like she does have a lot of this dysfunction, this, that, and the other. But one thing to think about is a child who's that young doesn't have the capability of cognitively thinking through like why they're masking. So if they are masking, the question I would ask is it that they're masking, or is it actually that they have this skill set, but there's various times or places where maybe that skill set becomes too difficult, and that could stem from like a higher anxiety. So I think that masking becomes more common as we get older. I would say like between teen years and higher is when I usually will introduce that. So
Absolutely. I'm
yeah.
thinking of a young adult that I've worked with. Wonderful. She wanted to be a teacher, so she got through school, got her teaching degree, was working in a school. But her frustration was she did want to connect, but she didn't know how. And so the teachers were getting together in the evening time, going to a happy hour. She couldn't connect to even go to these things.
Yeah.
During lunch, she found herself sitting alone because it was too difficult to know what to say when they sat and had lunch. It caused her tremendous stress. So the anxiety wasn't what, the anxiety was in the moment of not knowing what to say. So she became more avoidant, and she was very upset by this. This was somebody, interestingly enough, that had been diagnosed with SM and autism was never brought up. But when you really saw this picture, it was an autism picture. She was masking over the years as she got older, and she didn't have any real friendships when you really questioned the family for years. Never had a friend. When she was younger, mom said, which I think confused the picture, is that she had friends. Well, guess what? They weren't real friends. It was over an area of an interest. It was going to an art class. So she associated or doing art when they came over. It was the activity that was of interest. It wasn't the connection, the social connection. Anyway, I suggested autism testing to this family that I started working with. And needless to say, level 1 autism, very clear. And you know what? It was very validating to that young adult.
Yeah.
Because now she understands this is part of her presentation of the neurodivergence and why this is hard. There's nothing wrong with her. It's just hard. So we have to work on it. But she had so many other gifts. She was an artist, such an artist. She was amazing with animals and volunteered in an animal shelter and took in, foster animals. And she was just, people loved her. Her students loved her. So she did well with younger kids, which is why I think she was drawn to teaching, which is interesting. But the interaction amongst the staff forming, and she wanted she would love to have had a romantic relationship. She couldn't even think about that.
Yeah.
So again, you may not know for years, but it becomes a very validating situation. Let's talk about the evaluation process. At the Smart Center, we do something called the Selective Mutism Evaluation, which easily can be found on our website, selectivemutismcenter.org, in Getting Started. But we do this because it helps us understand and conceptualize an individual's presentation. It's not child's mute, adult's mute, whomever. Let's get you to talk. Let's, build some comfort and yada, yada, yada. They begin to verbalize. I don't know how to do it that way. I need to understand that individual. I need to know what their whys are or what may be contributing. I need to understand parenting style for kids and teens. I need to understand their baseline stage of social communication from setting to setting. We need to understand that. We need to understand, what are they doing in school? Are they completing tests on time? Are they interacting with peers? What are their interests? We need to understand the whole person. What else is going on that is contributing to that individual's social communication challenges? Once we have that, we will screen for all of the whys. So it's beautiful because it gives us an understanding to start with treatment, but also school-based accommodations and interventions. And so the SMI, the SMI is the Selective Mutism Interview. It's really what we do in states we're not licensed in, but, we do the SME as a way to get started with treatment, or the SMI, and school-based accommodations, interventions. That's where we'll pick up on a lot of this, unless a family comes to us and says, I'm questioning this, or my child's been diagnosed with it. And I've had kids diagnosed with autism that never had formal autism testing. In the last year, I'd say 3 or 4 cases came to the Smart Center. Child was diagnosed with autism when I didn't see autism. When we did the testing, when we actually did the formal testing for autism, the ADOS, the ADIR, and the other tests we do, that we often do if we need to, there was no autism.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the selective mutism presentation and the similarities that you may see between the two, child was diagnosed with autism, didn't have autism.
Yeah.
So it's not, you have to think of that too.
Mm-hmm.
Were there formal tests to assess this individual? Talk to us about it. Look, this is one of your specialties, testing for autism. Talk to me. Talk to me.
Like, again, we could obviously talk about this with families who maybe have more questions, and that could definitely be something that we could talk about, to kind of have more extended time. Like you said, I do think there's a lot of individuals that do get the diagnosis, or maybe their diagnosis becomes inconclusive because they're mute. So we could definitely, do further testing. I think after we observe your child and maybe we make that recommendation based on whether we observe them at Communicamp or in one of our intensive treatments, and we're kind of seeing some of the behaviors, we do many various ways, like many different things that we can, assess them. And that includes a parent interview, which is our ADIR. It includes our ADOS, which is, the in-person testing. We also have adapted a virtual platform, which is the Avabo, which we can actually assess individuals from many different states that we're licensed in. And again, we would make that decision if we feel like your child is, able to participate virtually.
Or an adult.
Or an adult. And then, like I said, we also have various videos that sometimes we might gather. We have like different, questionnaires, something called the GARs that we'll utilize as well. So there's many different ways that we collect a lot of this information. But I would say the first step is completing the SME or the SMI, depending on your state and country. And then we would help guide you in that next step.